All right. So, hey y'all, I'm Cindy. I do product and ops at AirOps. Fun fact about me, my favorite hot sauce is sriracha. A close second is Cholula. So whatever you guys like there, but I love sriracha. In today's session, we are going to be looking at the sales call, and we're going to be scoring it with an LLM step. The key here is that we're also going to be figuring out how to ingest your sales call, as well as also transforming this into actionable data. And then lastly, we're going to use this to either update our Salesforce or HubSpot, and then we can also automate this into a summary in Slack. So I'm going to get started here. What you want to do is actually, there's a link to the template. However, if you have an AirOps account, you can go ahead and go into the templates. We have a recently published template there in the transcription section. I'll show you quickly here. In the templates, if you go here, there's a Firefly's sales call lead qualifier, and this is what I'm going to be using. You can go ahead and just use this template to follow along and kind of work through this with me. If you don't have, Fireflies, if you don't have HubSpot, Salesforce, that's totally okay. You can just follow along. And you can use this template. If you don't have an account, I would go ahead and go to the airops.com/register link and sign up there. So I've already started this here, and I'm going to show you guys from here. Again, to think about an AirOps app, the way that I would think about this is, one, what is the data that we're trying to bring into an LLM step to help, enhance the data? And then two, how are we going to bring that data out of AirOps and back into your system? So the first question here is, okay, where is your sales call? And right now we have this app, which is, set up for Fireflies. However, I will say this is also perfectly suitable for a Gong. Definitely would need to check out more about Chorus, how to set that sales call there. But there are a lot of ways to actually integrate with your current system. And today we're just going to look at Fireflies specifically as an example, and you can extend this to your own system. So to bring in, the actual sales call, there are a couple ways that we can do this. However, we're going to start with the most simple one, which is the link to the sales call itself. So in our start step here, this is where we configure our inputs. If you're new to AirOps, our inputs are how we customize the app. It's how we provide custom information. What we're going to do is have a input here called the link to the Fireflies sales call, which you can tell, when you're running this app, you'll click the test button over here to see what this input actually looks like. And then we'll also have an optional field, which is the sales rep name. But the most important piece of information here that we really need is the sales call link itself. So if you don't have a Fireflies account, no problem. I'm going to show you here what this looks like. This is Fireflies, and Matt, did an AirOps intro with an awesome guest, Amr. And so just as an example, this is the sales call transcript that they did. And what I need to do is actually just take this link here, because in this link, there is an ID that we will use to retrieve this transcript. So depending on your system, typically like Gong will also use this link, a type of link where you will just fetch the ID. So you can do the same there, but we're going to use this link as the input. And what we're going to do is just simply test this step. So we can pass in the input by clicking test the step on the start step. What you would want to do is copy and paste, the link that you want to transcribe. And then we save changes. Okay, so this is first step. We're just passing in the sales call itself. Now we need to actually get the transcript from Fireflies. And so the best way to figure this out is one, we will have integrations in the future. So a lot of this, will move to an integration step, which will make it much more friendly for you all. However, at the time of this, this video, what you really need to do is fetch via the API. So what I would do is, you could say Gong, API key, in Google. Here I did Fireflies, how to get my API key. And it took me to this page that says, Fireflies API integration. And over here, it provides my API key, which I will need to use to authenticate this step. So I'm going to use the Fireflies API key here, and I'm going to use, based on their documentation, this step here, which will give us the actual transcript itself. So I converted from the API documentation, I took that and I just placed the headers here and I placed the body here. I've done some of the harder work so that if you actually use Fireflies, it shouldn't be too hard to actually fetch the transcript ID here. But we can walk through more in detail about how to actually set up an API step in the future. Assuming that some of you all are, more beginners to this, I'm just going to show you that, this is how we're going to grab the information from Fireflies. One key here now is that the API step actually requires the ID. And so here, we actually want to pass the ID from the transcript step that we passed in. But to extract this, there are a couple of ways. And the most efficient, I think, at this point in time is actually to use a GPT 3.5, either Turbo or Turbo Instruct step to do this. So, for you coders out there, you could do this with code, you could extract this, ID, but it's actually really quite simple to use a, turbo call to actually extract information. And so this is the LLM step here. We have a number of models that we use. In general, for really low-level basic tasks, such as text extraction, we highly recommend GPT 3.5, highly recommend Claude Instant. And in this case, Turbo Instruct is a newer model that they put out here, which is the fastest model. And what it does is it's basically like an instructional, input and output type of model. So instead of a chat format, this is more like, here's what goes in and here's what comes out. So in this step here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, okay, here's the input. And this is actually just, some made up ID here. What I want you to do is get the output. And so with this format, Turbo Instruct actually performs really well. It's just going to extract this piece of this ID that I'm looking for and follow the pattern that I give it. So this is kind of like a specific type of, prompting for an instruct model. However, just with a basic, here's what you put in, here's what I want out, here's what I give you, and here's what I want from you. It does follow the instructions quite well. And so we can expect it to give us, the ID from our URL. I would recommend this type of method for, any type of structuring that you want to do, like give me a formatted URL or extract any type of data, like Turbo Instruct or, Turbo as well is, a great way to do this.
Questions. Is there a reason why AirOps web scrape would not be suited for this? Or are there other ways that we could do this? I know you mentioned code, but
the transcript.
Yeah, to pull the. I think the question is on the extracting the ID.
Yep, I think for a web scrape step, if you pass this into it, you might not actually be able to get much information. What the web scrape step would actually do is just grab everything from that page, but it might be blocked because it's going to be a private URL to your account, and so I don't think that it would actually get this ID specifically. It's more of a literal task versus like a versus something where you're trying to grab something from the site itself. So this is very literal to the URL. It just happens that, Fireflies and Gong and many of these sites put their ID in the URL. So it's a very convenient way to do this. Not sure if that answered your question. This is fairly formulaic in terms of extracting ID. Is there a non-LLM way? Yes, there is. You can definitely use regex and then put, or some kind of show me a URL, then put a placeholder here and use that placeholder. Seems like an LM could potentially hallucinate an incorrect link. It's actually quite intelligent in this specific format because of the structure that we've provided in the prompt. Yes, you can use regex. However, for the purpose of showing people who aren't coders how to do this, regex would just require you to write a code step, kind of inconvenient, have to figure out what that regex is. But here it's, I will say that because we've prompted it with this specific structure, like, here's the input structure and here's the output structure, and it's very well defined, it doesn't actually hallucinate in these occasions. If it was public, can you instruct WebScrape to pull a specific piece of data from the page? Yes, you could instruct it to pull from that page. I'm not sure if the actual ID shows up on the page itself, if that makes sense. Because the ID is more of just like a identifier, but it's not something that you typically want to see on a page with your transcript. So let's go here really quick. So I took a look at this page with the transcript. It's gonna give me the transcript itself, but the ID is not the most important thing to show to users here. So that's why it's in the URL versus on the actual page. So if I scrape this, I would get all this information, but I probably wouldn't get the actual ID. So yeah, there are many ways you can do this. I think that this is actually the fastest off the shelf. And you can use this for any type of extract function here. Okay, so let's run this. All right, it gave me the right output for my input. So when I test one step, it will take the input that I've passed through here and it will, apply this step to my input. If you're new to AirOps as well, this is an input and we're using liquid syntax here. You can access this with this little pill here to actually get your variables. And so this is how we actually pass the input into this LM step. Okay, so now that we have this step, it's extracted the ID. What we want to do is now run the API step. So this step again has been customized for Fireflies. You would have to customize this for Gong, for whatever you're using. But what you do need to do is go to the API documentation and figure out what does the API call actually look like. And so you'll take your token here and then you'll pass it through as well as the actual fields that you want to retrieve. So here I'll show you what the output of the step looks like. This is going to give us a lot of data, including the transcript itself. And so at a sentence level, it'll give me the speaker name as well as the text itself. I'm going to now just hide some of this so you can see the broader structure. In AirOps, if you see this kind of output that shows there are lines that are numbered, it has this kind of object structure. This is called a JSON object, and JSON is going to be one of the most important data structures that we use to pass information between steps in AirOps. So it's definitely helpful to get familiar with what JSON looks like. Basically, you have these brackets which define your object, and within your object you have something called a key, which defines the specific type of data as well as the value of each key. So here you can see, okay, within this object we have the data, but we also have within this data we have the transcript, and within the transcript we have more information such as the sentences, which we'll pull out for the transcript. We'll also have the title of the call. We'll have the email of I guess the host here, or as well as the organizer and the participants. We have the date, and all of this information up here, sentences through date, is information that we're just going to pull in. So now that we've got the information from Fireflies, we can now put this into an LLM step. So a big part of AirOps is moving information which is structured to now unstructuring it for the LLM step. and then asking the LLM step to now give me structure in the output once it's, after it's been generated. So we need to unstructure the data for the LLM, and then we need to restructure it for the next steps that we want. So here's kind of how we're going to dig into the actual LLM step. It's chunky. There's a lot going on here. I'm going to try to break it down a little bit further so that we can go through this step by step. Okay, so this system step here is basically a definition of what the AI is supposed to do. So if you have very strict, definition about its task and what it's, who it is and what it's supposed to do, that can live in the system. And then from there, the chat is basically the conversation between a human and the AI. And so here is in the user is where we actually provide the specific information that we want it to do, including the transcript, including all of the information about the sales call, etc. So to put this, more straightforward in one more way, the system defines who the AI is, and then the chat, including the user and the assistant, is basically the conversation between a user, a human such as yourself, and the AI. So I typically like to put very strict definitions in the system because it obeys, quote unquote, obeys the system, a bit more, and it's very definitional. Whereas all the context and all the information about, the specific case that I want to present to it, I typically provide in the user. If you provide too much information in the system, I tend to see that it may not follow certain, whether it's commands, tone, style, and language. So I do like to put more of the context in the user itself. Okay, so in this example, let's go to the system here. I say, okay, you are a sales lead qualifier for AirOps. If you're doing this on your own, you'll want to change everything that says AirOps here to your own company. So your task is to take a sales discovery call transcript for a lead source by an SDR, summarize it, determine if it met 2 or more of the BANT criteria, and output in JSON only with this format. So there are a couple of things going on here. One, it needs to determine if the transcript met certain criteria. And then 2, it needs to output in a specific format that I want. So for your own case, you're going to want to pass in the criteria that best fits your company or your use case. Here, we've taken something called BANT, which is budget, authority, need, and timeline, and we've put that into this so that it has like a very specific way of determining, yes, this lead is qualified or no. I will say the more definition, the more instruction you provide, the better it will actually respond, because you can think of the LLM, kind of as like, high school student, just like helping you out here. And so you need to provide very specific instructions about what you want and what you don't want.
There's a question.
Let's take a look. How and why are we using multiple user steps? I imagine yes. If we imagine a regular ChatGPT window, is this just like sending 3 messages in a row? Wouldn't it want to respond to everything we said? So this is that's a very good point. This is a technique that I've kind of used over time that I guess I haven't defined it very well. But you'll notice that if you actually, the putting information in separate user messages actually does help it define different parts of your message, if that makes sense. So if you're instructing, or if you have information, that are related to many different things, and you have many different instructions, it's actually very hard for it to follow the logic, very linearly in one user message. It just depends on the use case and kind of experimentation here. But over time, I found that it's helpful to split out the context, into multiple user if there's a lot of information. And so here we will pass a lot of information, specifically the transcript. And that's why I do want to split out another user message here, because the transcript is really long. So there's a lot of information that gets lost in this long conversation that you're passing to it. And so it's helpful at the end, and this is a little small technique here, but at the end I do say, okay, here's now what I want you to do explicitly. Determine if the lead is qualified or not, and output in JSON only. Those are the two things that I wanted it to do. And to help remind it that that's its task is helpful at the end in a new user message, because all of the instructions and all of its, what it's supposed to do kind of has gotten lost already, in the middle of this transcript that I'm passing. So I will say that, yes, splitting out the information in different user messages does help, as well as the order. And so if you notice, I do place the ultimate instruction in the final message, and it's very short, so it kind of understands exactly what it needs to do. So there is some thought behind that. You'll see that over time, if you do just pass everything in one message, it may or may not always follow your instructions. So this is like a secret prompting technique.
Yeah, maybe explain a little bit on like why we didn't use an assistant and what a user assistant pair is generally, Cindy.
Yes. So an assistant, basically a user assistant pair, is an analogy or an example that we give to the model for it to understand the output that we want. Typically, we use user and assistant pairs when there's a very specific structure to the output, as well as tone, style, and language that we want in the output. So how you would do this here, if I were to do this again, actually, I will show you a better example by going over to this transcript ID. This is a very simple example of how you can actually use the user assistant pair here by converting it to turbo instead of turbo instruct. What you're doing is providing an analogy of what you want. So this would be the input, and this would be the output that I want. So in essence, what I did with inputs and outputs in the instruct step, I would do similarly here with the chat. However, what we're doing is saying, okay, this is the input and this is the output that I want. And this is where we would use the user and the assistant to give it examples, to give an analogy of what it's supposed to do. So again, exactly like I did earlier with the input and output from extract, but now I've transformed this into a chat format where you'll say, okay, this is my URL, this is the output that I want, this is my URL, this is the output that I want. And what you're doing is you're basically simulating a conversation that has happened. And you're saying, okay, now with this sales call that link that I provide you, please give me the right output based on what you've already output here. So let me quickly test this here. Okay, so it gave us the same output, and that's an example of how you would use the users in the assistant pair here. The reason why I didn't put this in here is because, one, the length of a transcript is typically pretty long, and so I'm using 32K, but even then it's kind of like not, the best use of 32K is expensive. If you don't know, in terms of like the cost overall, it's much more expensive than turbo. And so it's not the best use of an input and output if I know I can get a structured output the first time. So that's kind of the reason why I didn't do it here. Cool. Did I miss any other questions?
Great question.
Okay. All right, so now that I've gone through some, okay, the overall structure, I'll show you here, how we want it to output in JSON only, and kind of the structure that we need to provide for it to understand. So if you need a structured output, the reason why we're doing a structured output is because really we're going to use this to update Salesforce and HubSpot later. And you need to be able to grab specific fields of information. For example, I want the deal name, I want the deal description, I want to be able to populate HubSpot with these specific pieces of information. Unless you split that out into different fields like this in JSON, you're not going to be able to actually update your HubSpot or Salesforce with the information specific to each field. So that's why we use JSON to be able to actually, structure that data that we then want to use and further and later in our workflow. So here, I've provided a lot of information. It, ranges from the call name call date, I tell it to give me everything from, you know, lead name, the emails, and then basically a summary of the actual transcript itself. Then I ask it to evaluate all the criteria and then tell me whether it's qualified, provide rationale, and then if the lead is qualified, give me, you know, deal information. If the lead is not qualified, provide suggestions on what the SDR could have done better when sourcing the lead. So there's a lot of different, you know, logic here. It actually does, you know, follow this logic really well. And then here in the chat, this is where I actually provide the context. So here's where you would provide your qualification process. What are the questions that you need answered? You know, what would be ideal customer, and what would not be ideal here. So I just provide the criteria. Now I'm providing the actual discovery call for AirOps. And here, I'm going to break down some of the liquid syntax here because JSON is how we structure the information. Liquid is, on the other hand, is how we actually access the information from the JSON object. And so they kind of go hand in hand. You want to know how to structure your information. However, you also want to know how to actually access that information when you need to reference it in an LLM step. So if you remember here, the best way to show this actually is to run this really quickly, and I'll show you kind of what it looks like in the logs, and then we'll go back to the output. So when I'm populating an LLM step here, what I think about is, okay, how do I get this information from the previous step from this JSON object? Okay, so the JSON object here, you can go to the logs on the side. You can see that this was step 1. And what you want to do is actually now index into this object to get the right information. So by using this, you know, period syntax here, you're actually referencing and indexing into the object. And so we're saying, okay, I want this data object here. And then within this data, I want the transcript. And then within transcript, I actually want this title. So if I pass this information here, which is the step 1.output, I get the data, I get the transcript, and I get the title within, nested within these layers. This will actually pass AirOps intro to this title. If you've never seen this before, this is probably, you know, one of the most powerful ways to actually access your data. Highly recommend to kind of just get yourself familiar with how to use Liquid to access your JSON. Okay, do you have any questions here? Okay, if we wanted a CSV as an output, would using this JSON key column row in a CSV as the user step be the most efficient way to do that today? Yeah, I will say that we are looking to support CSV as an output. However, right now it is very efficient to output as JSON, and then you can use an online converter to convert JSON into a CSV. So highly recommend that. Similarly, we can also input as CSV and those become JSON objects. Liquid just means using the variable from earlier steps. Yes, liquid is a specific syntax that I think originated with Shopify, and it allows us to reference previous steps, yes. And the way that you can actually get these steps is by clicking on these little buttons here. So again, if I had step 1, this would give me step 1.output. But again, to actually get specific information that is within this large object, I need to index the actual, you know, specific values, not just the entire object. So yes, this is the liquid syntax. Okay. Yes. The dot notation lets you dig, and I assume that only works when the previous output step is output in JSON. Yes, JSON as well as a list. We're not going to go into lists really in this video. However, you will notice that if you have an object that has square brackets instead of curly brackets, you can actually index those elements as well. They are indexed on, you know, from 0 and incremented from, you know, upward by 1 from 0. Are there plans to make the buttons pre-fill with the available keys within the object? I think that's a really great idea. I'm not sure if that's on the roadmap just yet, but I do think that that is a really great idea. Ideally, it would be a super simple process to be able to, dig into your object and figure out exactly what you're trying to access here. In the meantime, I highly recommend looking at the logs. That shows you kind of everything about previous steps and what you're trying to access. So the same process is really applied through all of these, other variables. Again, there is some nuance every now and then, and that's where more complex logic comes in with, for example, our date time, which was not formatted in the proper format that we wanted. In addition here, this is also another piece of more complex liquid syntax. However, I do recommend learning a little bit more about liquid because it'll help you in the long run. So, for example, we have our sentences here. And instead of using a code step, we can actually just use liquid to get every sentence. And what we're doing is we're saying, okay, we're going to loop over and go through every single sentence in this list. So this is a list here with the square brackets. And for every sentence, it's going to give us the object. However, we actually want the text. We don't want the speaker name, and we want the text for every sentence. So what I do here is I just say, okay, for each sentence in this object or this list here, give me the speaker name and give me the text. And so when it comes out, I'll show you guys what this looks like. I can just drop this in a text step here, but it'll just give us a really nicely formatted transcript here. So we don't have to use a code step. So this is kind of like, lesson 101 on how to do liquid here. There's a lot you can do with liquid. However, let me just show you really quickly in a text step what this looks like. Oops, our text step needs some help here. Try it one more time. Okay, I think we need some help on the text step here. So I won't show you what this output looks like, but I'll move on to the next step instead of showing you what this transcript looks like. It'll basically give you speaker name, text, etc. Okay, so I ran this, forgot to show you all. Let me run it one more time so we can see. You'll see that it obeys the instructions pretty well in that it's going to give me an object, and I can be very sure that it's going to give me an object because I gave it very explicit instructions. So there are ways, again, that you don't necessarily need the user assistant if you have GPT-4. There are ways to actually prompt this so that you can get exact output structure. Okay, so it's giving me all the information here. Ideal state, next steps, budget. All right. Awesome. So as you can see, this is output in JSON, which is exactly what we need. And now we're going to take a look at how we can actually integrate this into our systems. So this is probably one of the hardest steps, mostly because Salesforce and HubSpot are not super user-friendly. However, we will be integrating and adding these as integration steps in the future. So hang tight, if you don't want to use Zapier right now, you don't want to actually deal with the integration, that's totally fine. You can skip over to this Slack step here later, which I'll show you, which provides the summary. However, if you want to actually update, your Salesforce or HubSpot, to do it right now, this would be the best way is actually to set this up here in Zapier. So let me show you really quickly that there are times where we do use Zapier because there are integrations that are just a lot more difficult, and Salesforce is one of those right now. So what I'm going to do is we're going to catch a raw hook here. So we're setting up a webhook basically, which will listen for whenever we actually hit this endpoint. So this is a webhook URL, which we end up passing back into, let me move this over here, which we set up here in this API step. So what we're doing is we're posting to this webhook and it's listening, and we're passing all of the information that we have here. Step 2.output is like the entire JSON step that we have, all the information that we need to pass. And then once we make this request, we can refresh here. Let's see, should be able to also find new records. So if I click play here, this will hit the endpoint, it's listening. And then when I click find new records, it should update with our last request. Okay, so this is the one that I just clicked on, and we can go ahead and use this. So what we're going to do here is actually just run another quick code step. Really, I would have expected Zapier to actually transform the JSON that we had. For some reason, it didn't quite do that. And so what we're going to do here in Zapier is we're going to transform it into JSON. And then we're also going to format the emails, because what we're going to do is search over these emails to see if any of our leads have the email from that was listed in Fireflies. So here we're going to test this. And basically what this does is it now structures all the information properly in Zapier. So if you notice previously, it was all just one big blob of text. Now we actually have structured information, which we can then use to pass into the next steps. This is probably like the most tricky part about Salesforce, is finding a lead associated to an email. To automate this, we're really making the assumption that, someone on the email or someone on the call has an email with, that matches a lead with the same email. So that's one key assumption here. But if that assumption holds, really what we're doing is we're just finding where the email is, a lead has an email that is also one that attended the call. So if we test this, it gives us back the lead. And so once we have the lead information, we can basically do anything that we want to update the lead. And so from this step, we're going to then update the lead so that it's qualified. Again, this is all if you, have integrations with Salesforce. It is pretty dense here, so there's all sorts of information that you can pass back and forth. I'm just assuming that, okay, we just want to make this qualified. So we go down to the status below, and then we set this as qualified. Again, now we're going to just create an account based on the lead information. So you can create an account here, you can create an opportunity, have a Q&A here. How accurate is the output here generally? 80% requires some double checking and updating. Are you referring, hey Nick, are you referring to the output from the LLM step in terms of like the data, or are you referring to something else?
I think the output.
Yeah, I will say that there are some ways that we can improve this such that, if we don't have the company name, like the total output. Yeah, so there are ways that we can actually improve this so that it has more context and more information. For example, if we had, the company name, if we wanted to pass all that information through, we can definitely use that up front so that it doesn't need to infer or make guesses about the company, etc. However, given the email address comes from your company, I think generally it does a pretty good job of deducing and pretty good job of understanding that information. When it comes to actually qualifying and disqualifying the lead, it does a good job. I will say that you could find varying results. So I've run, the same the same transcript through the same prompt, and it could give me a varying results. So that could mean that I need to update the specific criteria, the specific instructions, so that they're more, a lot more strict, if that makes sense. But if you want it to have more leeway, that's one thing. However, if you want it to be very strict about your instructions, you basically need to go back here and in this qualification process, provide very explicit instructions. One other method, which we aren't covering here, is also to store, the lead qualifications, and then bring those back in through a memory store to kind of show the model. Okay, here are ones that were qualified previously. Here are ones that were not qualified. And so it can have a point of reference to compare previous qualifications or not. So that's another way to improve this. However, we haven't added that here, but I will say both the prompting plus giving it more context is going to help it generate better output. Okay, so I'm going to quickly wrap up and show you just by kind of running this, how this will actually update in Salesforce, and then show you quickly in HubSpot because I want to leave some time for questions. Here, so if you notice one thing, Amr didn't have, he used his personal email for this example, and so he didn't have, the company name was not extracted properly, and so in this instance, it was in one instance it was unknown. In the previous instance, I think it gave me the email address. Again, this is one point where we could actually just improve and provide the company if necessary. So I'm going to test this out. Let's retest the step. And actually, I don't think I updated this lead to qualified. So I'm going to also test this step. So you can see here it's new. It should give me like a qualified state here after I test this. Retest the step. Let's see if it worked. Okay, there we go. So just even running that one step, it changed to qualified. Let's see if it gave us a new, I think it should have given us a new account here. Unknown, unfortunately. And then once we hit the opportunity, it should give us a new opportunity here. So we're going to test this one more time. Required fields are missing. So we would just need to update this again. This would be the company. Oops. And the close date, I think we have a close date in here. Yep. Okay. Next steps are I've added, there are a lot of fields that you can add here, but let's just try this one more time. All right, so now we should have a new opportunity. Unfortunately, it's called unknown because that was the output from one step, because we really need to pass in, better information to give it the actual company name. And so once we do that, it'll pass the actual name of the company. Okay, so that was Salesforce. Any questions on Salesforce here? Again, we will have integrations in the future, so this shouldn't be a hairy task in the future. Similarly, HubSpot, we're not going to use Zapier. They actually have pretty good and a straightforward way to set up their API. All you need to do is create a private app, and then you'll have an access token here. And then they have, some straightforward documentation on their API requests, which you can go to in their docs. So I've set this up already. However, I'm unable to show you how this works because I can't actually show our HubSpot here. But what you would do is something similar, where you're just posting a request to the deals and passing in your API key. What you'll need to do is figure out the deal stage that you've defined, the pipeline that you've defined, and then update this accordingly. But it'll create a new deal for you if qualified. I forgot to mention here, there was actually a conditional that I should have covered. Basically, if qualified, we want to do one set of actions. If it's not qualified, we want to do another set of actions. So that's what I'm doing here is I'm saying, okay, I'm taking this qualified attribute, which came from the output of the LLM step, and I'm saying, okay, if it's yes, if it's qualified, I want you to create a new opportunity, an account. If it's not, I actually want you to change the status to disqualified. So this is where we'd go through another whole workflow in Zap to actually say, okay, instead of qualified, we actually want to set it as disqualified. Similarly, we would put this in the conditional here, so that if it's yes, we would create the deal, and if not, we would just skip it. Okay, last step here, summarizing the call in Slack. This is a really great integration for y'all to check out. Basically, you just want to drop in the integration step here. Let's see. Integration step. And this will give you Slack, and then you'll send channel message. But we've already configured it here, so I can just show you really quickly what it looks like. We're going to pass in the channel with the hashtag, and then all you need to do is pass in the relevant information, a summary, basically the current state, the ideal state, all of the criteria that was listed out. And then once you run this app, it'll hit Slack, and you'll get a message in Slack immediately. So I'm unable to, I can run this now, and then we can screenshot and show you guys what this looks like later. But basically, this sent a message to Slack. And in the future, there is room for improvement. Really, what we would want to do is we would want to set this all up as a webhook as well. Once a sales call lands in Fireflies or Gong, whatever it is, we would want this to trigger automatically. And I think that's kind of where you have end-to-end automation. Right now, this is asking you to provide the link, which means, okay, I have to go fetch that. However, in the future, I do think, we'll show an example where you can just add this, and make this a webhook such that it'll trigger every time you have a new call. So that's the next step here. But I wanted to leave some time for questions. We have a couple of minutes left. Any questions? Let's see. Is there a simple playground template you'd recommend for getting more comfortable testing out just those JSON, LLM, JSON steps? Yes. Playground template. Let me think. Let me get back to you on the templates themselves. I think in terms of the JSON, if you go into a Google search step, that's probably the best way to check this out. So a Google search step will give you a list. Just take a look at the Google search step here. It'll give you, JSON, raw JSON. This is definitely something that you can work with. It'll give you a list of JSON objects, and then you can work with that pretty easily. I will say we also have a couple of other steps. Your memory search step actually is outputs in JSON right now. We want to make improvements to that. We actually want people to have the option to switch between JSON and Markdown, so that you're not only limited to JSON, but I do think that JSON sometimes gives you that flexibility to tell the LLM more specifically what you want it to do. So I'd recommend, take a look at the memory search step, the Google search step, and maybe one of the LinkedIn steps. Cool. All right, do we have any other questions? If not, I'm gonna let's see, the text function. The text step, that's a great question. I can't show it right now, but basically it is the very opposite of JSON, where everything is, yes, it is an empty box. It is the opposite of the JSON, where everything is unstructured. So instead of having an object where you can access each element, you're just gonna get one body of text from this output. And the reason why you want to do this is sometimes, okay, what if you want to present your information in a proper document with Markdown, for example? You don't want to show it as a JSON object. You want to show it in Markdown. That's where you would use a text step to actually format the JSON into something that's nice and pretty versus, JSON object. So it's the very exact opposite, where you're now unstructuring it. You can drop variables into there. Yep. It will use liquid syntax as well. But you're basically getting one body of text instead of structured information. Yep. Cool.
Okay, thank you so much, Cindy, for that wonderful demo. I hope that everyone's taken something away from today's session. You will be sent a short survey about your feedback on today's session. We would really appreciate it if you could fill that up. Thank you so much, everyone, for staying until the end. We really appreciate your time. And if you open the Notion doc, you'll see the link to join the next session that's going to happen at the same time, but on 30th of November. So 2 weeks later, we have another Build With Me session. We really hope you can join us there. We'll see you on Twitter. We'll see you on Slack if you're part of the Builder community. Thank you so much for your time, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Appreciate
Bye, all.
it.